Coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
My name's Alex Kroeger. I'm a data scientist at 0x. 0x is a decentralized exchange protocol built on top of Ethereum. Before that, I was data science at Coinbase. Really excited to have the opportunity to speak at Reimagine 2020.
Everybody, it's Patrick McLain. As you know, one of your hosts for Reimagine 2020. At whatever point you're coming into this conference, we've had a lot of really interesting conversations the last 72 hours. This one in particular, I think is very interesting, right? Like many people have principles about what crypto or Bitcoin or any type of blockchain should be, right? Like they really think about decentralization. They think about kind of, separating power. What's really interesting about this next conversation, and I won't butcher it too much. I will let Alex introduce it. But Alex works for 0x, and I think for the longest time that I can remember hearing about decentralized exchanges, 0x has been one of those companies that their name always comes up in like being the leaders in the space, right? So again, I don't want to go too much on it. He will do a much better job explaining it than me. But Alex, introduce yourself to everyone and maybe tell them a little bit about how you got into blockchain.
Yeah, my name's Alex Kroeger. I'm a data scientist at 0x on the core team. 0x is a decentralized exchange protocol that's built on top of Ethereum. How I got into the cryptocurrency space, I've actually been interested in crypto for a long time. I graduated college in 2015, actually wrote my thesis on Bitcoin. So I've had sort of a nascent interest for a while. My first job out of college was actually at the Federal Reserve in the research department. And I worked a lot with, obviously I learned a lot about central banking and some of the concepts behind money. And throughout that time working at the Fed, I was just getting deeper and deeper into crypto, actually, ironic enough. And then 2.5 years ago, I started working for Coinbase and as a data scientist. And so I've been in the space ever since.
So you like, not many people have worked at both Coinbase and 0x, right? So clearly you're kind of like living and breathing in the space now, but like, for any of the students watching, right? Like whoever, like, can you tell everybody a little bit about your journey? Like were you a nerd growing up? Like obviously you're in technology, like how did you kind of come to blockchain? Like you probably had your plethora of job offers, right? Like how did you settle on blockchain?
Yeah, I find the crypto space super interesting from a number of perspectives. So I've always been the kind of person that I'm nerdy and like kind of intellectually curious. And so my interests go pretty wide. I have a lot of interests that are, both technical and, touch on like various topics like history, economics, politics. I think what makes crypto so interesting is it's kind of a mix of a lot of different things. I studied economics in college, and one thing I really appreciate about economics is it's sort of a cross between a bunch of different fields. It actually like touches on history, it touches on math, it touches on sociology in some ways. I think crypto is actually like kind of like that as well. It touches on you can look at it from so many different angles. It has super interesting technical aspects. It touches on law. It makes you think differently about how we think about money and economics. So I think it's just like, it's great for people who are sort of interested in looking at something from many different angles. That's what crypto is
Do
to
you,
me.
do you remember that point where like, did you have like a trigger moment where you're like, I like this, like I'm all in?
uh, yeah, it was a little bit gradual. I think I had probably my clicking moment when I was working for the Fed. I think at the Fed is when I kind of really got it. I think there was like a clicking moment when you kind of understand Bitcoin like at like a technical level, and then you kind of understand like what was kind of driving its creation, like what the technology actually is innovative, like how it's actually like taking away central intermediaries. I think that was like kind of the clicking moment for me. But I've had like many points along the way. Like actually the thing that got me into Bitcoin in the first place actually was hearing about Silk Road. Somebody said there's this totally virtual currency used to like that people are using to buy drugs online. I was like, no way. There's like no way that exists. And you look into it, you're like, wow, what is this thing? So that's like where my rabbit hole started. But I think it wasn't like I wasn't, I didn't hit the obsession bug really until a couple of years after that, actually.
Like, what is your obsession with it? Like what is the part that like attracts you to it the most?
I guess, yeah, I think figuring out how it works is what initially started that obsession. So like actually like kind of understanding how Bitcoin works technically made me realize kind of like how revolutionary that technology is and how it could have a bunch of different applications. Like that's what kind of led me into Ethereum too, is it's taking this generic concept of having a blockchain that allows you to decentralize intermediaries and applying it to like many different things. So I think understanding it technically helped me like kind of realize the potential of it, or make me like kind of project the potential of it. But then again, I think the reason I'm also interested in it is because like it hits, my interests are kind of broad and it like touches on a lot of different things. If that makes sense. Like I said,
I think Alex is saying he's a rebel, and he loves Bitcoin. So was Coinbase your first job in blockchain, or did you have another one before it?
Yeah, no, that was my first job in crypto. And I actually started.
That had to teach you a lot, right? Like, I mean, you obviously learned a lot from that.
Yeah, I learned a ton. Coinbase is filled with, I mean, it's a fairly large company at this point, and it's filled with so many smart people who know just a ton about this space. So, if you are like kind of a sponge and want to absorb a bunch of information, like Coinbase is a great place to be. I joined it at a very like interesting time. I interviewed at the end of 2017. So that was like the peak hype. And when Coinbase was growing a lot because they were trying to meet up with demand. And so I joined it at like this kind of inflection point where, over the course of 2018, the company, doubled, tripled in size. So, we were bringing in like all these new people, and it was just like a really exciting time to be there and learn.
So you went from Coinbase to 0x?
Yeah. At Coinbase, I actually worked on Coinbase Pro, the exchange product. And I went to 0x to be more involved in kind of like a blockchain specific project.
So like,
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, but like why? Like, was there was 0x like a company you were like gonna go like jump after? Was there something about it? Like how did you make that? Because I kind of view those two companies on like polar opposites, right? Like, I mean, elementally in the crypto world, it's like somewhat like U.S. government regulated exchange, and then the other side like DEX, right? So like, what did that transition look like, or how did you land there?
Yeah, they're very different. I mean, honestly, I see like they both kind of will exist. I think like both decentralized solutions and centralized solutions will exist for the foreseeable future, I think. So I think they, in a sense, they'll probably like continue to serve like different needs, different markets in a certain way. But they're like very different approaches to a similar problem, and that problem is exchanging. But yeah, I was kind of just like, I'm kind of like endlessly curious too. It's like, I wanted to see like what it was like on the decentralized end of exchange. Because I worked, like I said, I worked on Coinbase Pro. That is like basically a traditional exchange in its product. It's, you know, it's like a centralized database where you're settling trades. And it's not even really crypto specific. You know, you could be trading anything with like the tech stack that Coinbase Pro had. So I kind of had a hunger to go, you know, deeper in the blockchain space, like go to a project that was kind of interacting directly with the blockchain and building something on top of it. And yeah, 0x attracted me because one of the main reasons it attracted me, it had such a great team, still has a great team. There's a lot of smart people there, and I knew that would be another place I could go to where there would be a ton of smart people that I can learn from and grow there as well.
Awesome. So I promise I'll pivot off this point in a second, and I want to hear a lot about 0x, because like for anyone listening, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think whether you know what a decentralized exchange is or not, right? Maybe a lot of people do from this watching this interview. Maybe a lot of people don't. If you want to understand more about blockchain and more about cryptocurrency, it's inevitable, right? That the decentralized exchanges don't play a feature in that, right? So there's a lot of interesting points I think that we're going to get into here with Alex around 0x, but to kind of round out what we're talking about. So like, I heard you mention like, okay, so you wanted to see what the other side was like on a decentralized exchange. So what was the net there? Like, what did you learn?
What have I learned jumping into the decentralized exchange space?
Yeah.
Well, I've learned a lot about like what some of the challenges and like what it's like building on top of a decentralized technology stack. It's very different developing on Ethereum than it is on a more traditional centralized tech stack. So I've learned that. I've learned some of the challenges both on like the development side. I've learned about the challenges on like the user facing side of making decentralized applications. I think there's a lot of growing pains in the space, but you know, I think it has a bright future.
Got it. So let's pivot a bit to 0x, and I kind of want to deep dive. Right. So in general, we call it decentralized exchange, and I'll let you describe that. I feel like you guys kind of have some competitors now, like Kyber, Uniswap. Like maybe you feel like before you were kind of first to market, but now you have competitors. Like how do you feel about them? And so just take me through, take everybody watching through 0x.
Yeah, I actually want to start with like what is a decentralized exchange, because it actually like means many different things. So a decentralized exchange, I would say the decentralized part of it can actually mean many different things. There are many aspects of an exchange that can be decentralized. So like, what does a traditional exchange do? They custody assets. So you're actually like holding assets in an exchange platform, and they help buyers interact, and then they settle trades. So most of them operate in order book. So there's people with bids and asks, and then they match them together. So there's different aspects of that you can decentralize. I would say most what we call decentralized exchanges definitely decentralize the custody part. So most decentralized exchanges that I'm aware of they don't actually have control over customer funds. But then there's like varying degrees of decentralization after that. For example, like some decentralized exchanges don't touch order matching at all. Like that's all done by like either peer-to-peer or on-chain itself. Whereas other decentralized exchanges centralize that element of it. I don't know if you're familiar with UIDX, for example. UIDX is a decentralized margin exchange. So they don't custody users' funds. So that part is decentralized, but they actually run a centralized matching engine. So they're actually matching orders together. So there's like it's like a spectrum. It's a spectrum of what is even considered a centralized exchange. Yeah, that's sort of,
all right. Yeah. So maybe there are some like people who are just new to this space watching this.
Yeah.
Now. Like, go layman's terms. Like, just in 60 seconds, like explain Coinbase, explain like what 0x does, or like what the end product of 0x would be.
Yeah, I guess. All right. So if we want to talk about 0x specifically, so 0x is a decentralized exchange protocol that its particular take on a decentralized exchange is off-chain order routing and on-chain matching. So some decentralized exchanges are all on-chain. So it's like all the data that you need and all the application data is all on the blockchain. So 0x is, it takes orders. So like people saying, I want to buy this amount of token X for this amount of token Y. That's an order. Those orders exist off-chain. And so people can pass around these order messages off-chain. And then when you want to fill something, when you want to actually make a trade, you go to the blockchain and you say, I've got this order that's signed by person A, I'm person B, I'm going to fill it. So that's what 0x is in a nutshell. It's this off-chain order messaging system with on-chain settlement on Ethereum. What the cool part about that and what makes it like, what makes it a DEX is 0x is never custodying your funds. So never at any point are you out of control of your funds until a trade happens. So, and it happens, instantaneously from your perspective. So never are you not controlling your funds until a trade occurs and like swapping your funds for a trade that you previously agreed to, if that makes sense.
100%. So
yeah,
I want to pivot a little bit into like the market of decentralized exchanges. I think it's an interesting point, and again, to kind of recap what Alex was saying, whether you are, everything about blockchain, you're watching this, right? And I think I want to dive in here in a minute to kind of like what makes 0x different, or if you don't know anything, I think there's kind of divides in this blockchain space, right? Like there's many divides. I feel like this whole market is built around divides, like arguments in Reddit, or like, like Alex mentioned earlier, we were joking in a conversation, like I've seen schools and students like form on-campus blockchain organizations and like get a letter from the school that like they can't associate with like drug dealing groups like Bitcoin, right? So, the interesting thing about blockchain is like there's many things that like just aren't a normal technology. There's all these other factors to think about, right? So one of them is, who passes around the money? Do we trust them? Do we have faith in them? Can we validate what they're doing? Right. So, on one side, we have the Coinbases, the Binances of the world that have a kind of closed garden, right?
Yeah.
And what decentralized exchanges are really trying to build is that everyone can communicate between themselves, right? And there's some harmony in the middle, and that harmony is going to be a form of code that kind of makes everything happen, right? So if you look at the blockchain space, I think whether you're a trader or whatever, if you're in the States, you might have an account on Coinbase or everywhere else, Binance, etc. If we see the volume of what's being traded on exchanges, a lot of it falls on centralized exchanges, right? So, and want to hear your thoughts here in a second, right? So I think if we go back a year and a half ago, there was a lot of like hope that we don't want some dude who I've never met to like set all these rules that I can't control. And there was a lot of like motivation behind it. Now, like all great things, they don't happen overnight. And it's been one lesson I learned from blockchain. Like it's not easy to build a future, right? And we don't want it to be, because we don't want to build a lame future. We want to build a cool future. So over the last year and a half, many people have been working hard to build this decentralized exchange future, right? 0x is part of that, right? So want to get your thoughts, Alex. Like how do you feel like people had high expectations and that you guys are always kind of chasing that? Do you feel like there was other factors you couldn't control, which maybe are just coming to play that allow you to kind of increase adoption? So just in general, like, how do you feel about the space of decentralized exchanges? And when you look forward, like, what do you see?
Yeah. There's lots to unpack there. I think, it's sort of been this grand idea for a long time, because, centralized exchanges, it kind of naturally clashes with the ideas of crypto, right? it's sort of this centralized player in an ecosystem that really craves decentralization. And there's been a lot of problems with centralized exchanges. You know, a lot have been hacked, losing customer funds, and it's really put a blemish on the space. And so, you know, I think decentralized exchanges.
Well, wait, let
yeah.
me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is like people say hacked and they go, no, those dudes weren't hacked, right? But no one can validate it, right? Like sometimes people get, they say they get hacked and right, this is part of the fear. Like,
that's totally, yeah. I mean, that's totally, I mean, that's part of the problem with a centralized system. I mean, like who's the source of truth as to what happened? It's always going to be the entity. And, you know, I think there are cases where you want to, you know, where it makes sense to trust somebody. But that's what it is. You know, you have to trust that what happened is what they said happened. What trades took place, it's the trades they say took place. So yeah, decentralized exchange, I would say it's made, you know, sort of like steady progress over the years. I mean, there's many issues to tackle, and we've sort of seen like this kind of Cambrian explosion of different models of decentralized exchange. So as you mentioned, like on Ethereum, we have 0x, but there's also Uniswap and Kyber, Oasis. There's all these different people tackling the problem in a slightly different way. And so I think there's been sort of like steady progress both on the development front, like trying different back-end methods for decentralized exchange. And there's also been a ton of progress on the UX front. So making like this more accessible for people to actually go and use decentralized exchanges. Because there's a lot of barriers to people using blockchain apps. I mean, there's a lot of barriers for people using like financial apps in the first place. They can be confusing. And then you add a blockchain on top of it, it makes it very difficult. So we've actually seen like some pretty good growth in the space, I think, because of people tackling these challenges from these two different perspectives, like both the back end and the front end. And I also think that we're kind of like on this new tide of demand for decentralized exchange. So I think originally, like one of the biggest demand pools for decentralized exchange was the ICO craze in 2017. I think that craze is, you know, now pretty much over, but we had this new sort of phase of DeFi, decentralized finance, that is like generating a whole new growth in demand for decentralized exchange and the services it can offer. So that's a very long-winded answer, but maybe we can break down some of the.
No, like, but I think it's a very interesting topic, right? Because I mean,
yeah,
before this, the interview today, I talked to a lot of smart people I knew, right, and like got their perception on it, and
yeah,
you know, some of the things people were telling me like to look at, you know, I've seen it a bit, like, you know, I think the general consensus is that like in the last 6 months, decentralized exchanges have really started to pick up.
yeah.
I feel like, do you guys think that there's like a hindrance in infrastructure on Ethereum? Like, do you feel like you're not hitting like the volume you think you should hit or the transactions you should because the demand isn't there or the infrastructure isn't there?
I think it's, you know, like Ethereum as a bottleneck does come up sometimes. It's actually come up like recently, like when there's a lot of volatility and network activity picks up, transaction fees get really high. That's a bottleneck that manifests itself in a bad user experience for decentralized exchange. I would say there's still a demand issue as well. I mean, I think, so demand is growing. More people are coming to DEXs. We see both more like retail spot trading use cases coming in, more users coming in that way. We see more use cases, different use cases being tackled. We see margin trading increasing as a use case for decentralized exchange. But I think there's still a demand issue as well. I think that's partly driven by just the UX issues. It's still just not very equivalent to use a decentralized exchange. It's not as easy as it is to use a decentralized exchange as it is a centralized exchange. Yeah.
Well, and not to interrupt you, but I think this actually brings up a very interesting point. So for everybody listening that isn't completely familiar with 0x, and Alex, at any time, stop me if I'm wrong, right?
Sure.
Do you guys have like an end UI product where somebody can go and like trade something on, do you guys have a UI where someone can go use your service, check out, and like trade a product?
So we're actually like currently working on that. I don't know if you saw the launch of Matcha, but we're actually in like a beta testing phase of it right now.
But at a very high level, like it hasn't been in your DNA, right? Like your guys' DNA has never been like the UI, right? Like you guys are the pipes, like you guys have been building the low level infrastructure that allows these types of transactions to take place, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So historically 0x has been much more focused on sort of the base layer, like protocol, and like enabling what we call relayers to grow on top of 0x, who provide like an interface to trade.
All right. So, okay, now, I think we'll get to my point here in a second. When we talk about kind of educating or attracting a user base, right? Like what role you guys play there. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, if we look at Kyber, well, I guess take one step back. You guys offer a lot of API, developer tools, etc., that enable someone to build a decentralized exchange, but they would use you guys as like the routing, right?
Yeah, that's one way to use this.
Got it.
Build what we call like a relayer on top of us.
Got it. So now if we take Kyber, from what I understand, they offer fairly similar tools like API or whatever, but then they also have their own like front end tools where people can potentially do the whole thing on Kyber, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Kyber has Kyber Swap. So it's like a trading interface you can go to and swap tokens. So historically, 0x isn't like, we haven't been like full stack in that way. So we haven't really dabbled in front ends in the past. Though that's even changing now. So like I said, we have a new retail trading interface coming out called Matcha.
I mean, honestly, like I don't have a dog in the fight, right? Like, when I look at companies like Stripe, right? Like they didn't really have a UI. I mean, like they gave everybody like a pre-packaged JavaScript template, right, where they could like drop it into their code. But like what Stripe did really well was enable other people to kind of build on top of it, right? So that was kind of my long way around the answer, where so maybe you guys are kind of beginning or have experimented in the past with kind of touching the end user. So here's my question. Thanks for bearing with me. Like when you look at adoption, you say, okay, there's things like the infrastructure of Ethereum, et cetera, that kind of need to catch up because we hit these spikes of fees that make things they don't make economic sense. But if we can only control that so much, and we're kind of the pipes where like we can only control the UI so much, how do you guys view your role in kind of accelerating adoption in the decentralized space, like both to reach the consumer and obviously you guys have to wear another hat where you need to go also reach developers?
Yeah, you're right. That is like a lot of different people to serve. And we sort of have we have different ways of serving kind of each of those users. So like we make tons of developer tools. So if you code in JavaScript, we have tons of tools for interacting with 0x. And then on like the end user side, we're now kind of dabbling in, like building a front end to make it like simpler for like your everyday user to come in and work on 0x. We also even have like kind of an intermediate step where we have 0x API, which makes it so that a developer wouldn't even necessarily have to get like very deep into like how 0x protocol works to use 0x. You can sort of like use it like a more traditional like API service and get some data that you can use to interact with our contracts without really having to know what's under the hood. So I would say, there's different tools for like different levels of people interacting with the ecosystem. So we've got we're trying to approach everyone in that sense.
And like from what I've heard, like my outside perspective, like, do you feel like 0x is like the most hacker like friendly? Like you guys have like the most dev tools, the most ready to go to kind of build products?
I would say we have really great tools. I would say like our design is a bit more complicated than some other DEX protocols. Like that's kind of a spectrum too. So I would say like 0x is probably a little bit more full featured than some other DEX protocols. And so by that design, it's a little bit more complicated to interact with. But we have, I would say we have really awesome tools for developers to use for people trying to get into the space.
Got it. So let's wrap that up. Maybe the 3,000 university students or more listening to this right now, like they want to build a product. Maybe they're an engineer. They've never been a blockchain engineer. They want to touch it. Like, how do you guys help them make that experience easier?
Yeah. If you're kind of dabbling in the space for the first time, I would say go check out some of the UIs. Like first, go try out, go to Radar Relay, try and make a trade. Use Matcha when it's out, and then go check out our docs. Go check out 0x API and start playing around with it. There's a lot of material out there to help you, and also I think what's also great about the space, like 0x and like other projects in the decentralized exchange space, like we're very reachable. You can hit us up on like Discord or Reddit, and we'll talk to you.
You guys, for all the students out there, like sitting at home, they're not going to school, they're like been chilling on quarantine. Like, do you guys ever have hackathons or like any type of events or programs or anything that you run?
So we have. Yeah, so like I said, we're really active on Discord. We also will fund projects that look promising in the 0x ecosystem. So for people who are out there, building on top of 0x, like first of all, like, yeah, reach out if you need help. And like we would, the 0x team is always there to provide support. And, tons of other teams are as well for people who are building like kind of across projects and the Ethereum ecosystem.
Awesome. Well, we could probably talk about this for the next hour. Like, I think there's like a lot of things to like, decentralized exchanges, I think, are one of many like controversial topics in the blockchain space, right? One thing I always mention is you talk to people who've been in crypto for a while or blockchain, and they have a bit of pessimism, like maybe they went through some ICOs or whatever, right? Like they're not thinking of it the same way other people are. And I'll get on a call with like 30, 40 university students, like 19, 20, 21-year-olds, right? They don't have this pessimism. They're like, I'm going to build a project and I'm going to build it on blockchain. Like they didn't go through like some ICO scam or like, right? So I always laugh. I think that I can clearly see there's a bunch of motivated, engineers coming up behind, but what advice would you give to like any student going through now? Like, how would you think about blockchain today if you're kind of going back through university? How would you prioritize it?
Yeah, well, first off, I think that's like a really good point that you bring up in that, I think crypto kind of like overall like sentiment, if you're looking at like markets and prices, like, it kind of comes in waves. There's like speculative bubbles and the bubbles deflate. But I think if you look at like what developers are doing, people like building in the space, like that's been making, steady progress over time. So there's tons of like motivated teams out there who are building really great stuff on top of Ethereum and on top of other protocols. So yeah, if you're, getting started and want to get involved in the space, start building, start like reading white papers, read docs, and, reach out to teams. I think there's tons of reach out to developers. I mean, I think there's tons of like developers out there who are super motivated to build on stuff in the space, and like willing to help out, whoever reaches out. So yeah, I would say just like get involved in building and get involved in the developer ecosystem.
Love it. All right, everyone. I'm not going to lie. I've been on like 8 hours of interviews. I delayed on this guy for 45 minutes and he was super gracious to me. And It's been very nice to talk with you. Like I'm sure we can continue this conversation. And next week we have a bunch of interesting panels and things. I'm sure Adam and the rest of the team will reach out. We would love to hear your guys' point of view.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So, hey, for everybody watching, thank you for watching another interview. We're going 72 hours. Whether you like it or not, it's happening. Check out 0x. Like, if you're a developer and you want to build something cool, like, I feel like the fintech applications are probably the best right now for blockchain and the most innovative. Like, the biggest problem to solve are, like, how to do it in decentralized fashion. And I think you can get up and running quickly on 0x, Alex. You guys are trying to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, you get up running easily. Reach out to us. Hit us up on Discord, hit us up on Reddit. We're happy to talk.
And we'll put all those links here in the video. So yeah, very nice to talk with you, man. I appreciate you making the time. Sorry for my delay. I've been late to 2 out of 20 interviews. That was one of them.
Not bad.
Hey, have a good day, yeah?
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.